What is de-dollarization? This is a concept that's come up recently in the news and on Twitter. So I thought I'd break down what this means and why it is relevant in our sort of bizarre era that we live in. All right, welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about de-dollarization. So I'd like to apologize for my extremely boring background and horrendous lighting. I'm moving to a new office where I can record all sorts of cool videos for you, but it is under construction. So I was working out of a side office on a different floor that has awesomely fast internet, which is helpful for these videos. And today the floor that I was working out of it is a church, and it has all this music equipment for the church services on Sunday. And I did not expect when I went over there today to record this video for you that one of the owner's 3 adorable kids would be there playing the drums. It is a little bit tricky to record videos when you're about 10 feet away from several kids playing drums that are hooked up to a sound system. So I am instead at our local library recording this for you. So, all right, let's get to it. We are going to talk about de-dollarization. So this is a concept that I've heard quite a bit about recently. And the dollar has been the center of the global economy since 1944. After the Bretton Woods Agreement, world leaders decided that global trade would be done in dollars. This was partly done to help countries recover from World War II. A lot of damage was done in places like Europe, Germany, specifically Japan. They were devastated, like physically and emotionally, from war damages. The United States had the most gold at the end of the war, and since, with the exception of Pearl Harbor, the war wasn't really fought on U.S. soil, there was minimal damage, relatively speaking. So the deal was made to open up the U.S. market to exports products made in other countries. This is why, like, when I was a kid, a lot of stuff that we bought was made in Japan. That was done intentionally, to help the Japanese economy recover from World War II by giving them the way, coming up with the idea to create a manufacturing industry and giving them a market, which was essentially the U.S. market. And it's interesting because for the last few decades or so, Americans have criticized each other, and possibly rightfully so, that we've become this very consumerist culture and sort of programmed by ads to buy lots of stuff. Well, that was actually done intentionally after World War II to help a lot of countries recover from the war. Now, that was a long time ago. I think maybe we could have gone a different direction, but it wasn't just a random thing that the American market became very consumer-oriented. It was a deal. Okay, part of that deal also included that global trade was done in dollars, and in exchange, the U.S. military would be the police force of the global supply chain to ensure that all of these exported goods made it from Europe and Asia to the United States without being, taken over by pirates or other entities that would disrupt the global supply chain. And so this kind of made the dollar the center of everything. And for the most part, that worked kind of well for a long time. But every now and then, the United States military and United States foreign policy would flex their muscles and say, you know what? You're not allowed to do that thing. And if you do that thing, we're going to put financial sanctions on you and lock you out of this global financial marketplace, global trade marketplace. And we've kind of known over the years that countries like Iran and North Korea have sort of been the subject of these sanctions. And we're not going to get into whether or not those are deserved or not. It just put the United States military in a unique position to be calling the shots about who gets to play in the global marketplace thing. All right, there's also this other situation which is started in the 1970s where the U.S. and the OPEC nations, specifically Saudi Arabia kind of as the leader of it, made this deal that all oil would be sold globally in dollars, and the United States would again provide military protection to the Middle Eastern nations so they could ship their oil wherever they needed to, and it would get there safely. In exchange, all sales would be in dollars, and This helped keep the dollar very strong because everybody needed dollars to buy oil, so there was constant demand for dollars in the marketplace. This is great if you are somebody who benefits from a strong dollar, but there are lots of reasons why that is not necessarily a good thing. And the last couple of years, or specifically the last year or two, we've seen a lot of inflation, which has made things more expensive. And when the dollar has gotten stronger from the Federal Reserve hiking rates, it's kind of created this perfect storm. So what has happened is a lot of emerging market nations, so smaller nations, they have to buy dollars because everything is bought and sold in dollars. They often will buy things on credit. They buy energy and commodities for their citizens using debt markets. That's how that works. They sell bonds, they get money for it. And all that stuff is done in dollars. And we have this kind of perfect storm of conditions. Inflation is kind of affecting everyone everywhere, so it's costing more resources to buy the same amount of things. It's one symptom or a kind of consequence of inflation. And we also have this unique phenomenon that's hitting right now where the U.S. central bank has raised interest rates, which means that it's more expensive to borrow dollars. Like they have to pay more to get loans out in dollars. And when the exchange rate is not in your favor, meaning it's going to cost you more of your currency to get dollars, and the interest rates are higher, and we have inflation, it's really put a lot of countries in a very difficult situation where they just can't afford to buy the stuff that they could buy, a decade ago, because of these multiple conditions, none of which are terribly easy to solve, especially if you are one of these emerging nations that doesn't have the ability to print dollars. You're kind of stuck. So there's been a desire for countries to trade outside the dollar system. Like there just aren't a lot of benefits for many nations to have to buy and sell goods in dollars. And China and Russia have sort of created this coalition with other nations that are referred to as the BRICS alliance: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They have decided that they want to do trade with each other and have expressed interest in doing that outside the dollar system. So this isn't just led by one country or one specific reason, but most nations on the planet trade with other nations. There are not very many countries that produce everything they need and don't export anywhere else. So you have to kind of make the assumption that every nation is participating in the global marketplace. And if doing that in dollars doesn't help you, it creates this desire to have another reserve currency or payment currency to conduct trade in. And right now, the dollar is still the sort of leader. Every now and then, another country let's say China would sell oil in yuan, but other countries don't really need someone else's national currency. So this is where the desire to create a new basket currency has come up, where the BRICS nations have expressed interest in coming up with a new reserve currency that they would use for the purposes of trade. And this entire process, this entire concept, is referred to as de-dollarization. It is simply the global shift away from being centered around dollars and kind of figuring out other ways to trade with other countries in other currencies. Now, the answer has not been determined yet about what that other currency will be. And even if it will be one, it could be multiple. Some people think it could be a digital asset like an XRP or a Bitcoin that is not tied to any one specific nation. That is definitely something to consider because there is a consequence of being the nation that issues the global reserve currency. What happens is your currency gets really strong because all these people need to get it, and that makes it expensive for other countries to buy the stuff you make. Your exports are unaffordable to most other countries. This is why the United States has not had a booming export industry like it used to, because the strong dollar just makes it too the American products can't compete in the global marketplace because of the exchange rate. I mean, there's other factors that come into play, but that's a big one that covers like across industries, that a strong dollar makes U.S. exports not competitive. So if a country like China, who also does a lot of exports, if their currency became the global reserve currency, they would have the same problem. And one of the reasons why, Europeans and Americans buy a lot of stuff made in China is that it's inexpensive. And so it's very competitive. We often will buy the Chinese produced product because it's far less expensive than an American or European one. Well, what if you woke up tomorrow and Chinese imports were like 5 times as much money? That would really damage the Chinese export market. So I don't know if it's likely that China, who could they could just easily decide they want all of their goods that they export to be purchased in their currency. But I don't really think it's in their best interest to do that because it could negatively impact their export business, which is significant. And that same argument, that same logic applies to Russia, who also exports a lot of things, specifically energy. If their energy became considerably more expensive because of an exchange rate, then other energy producing nations would have an advantage. So this is why, this is not like a new concept. When the dollar was first proposed to be the global reserve currency after World War II, there was another proposal, this currency called the Bancor, which was a basket currency, very similar to the IMF's SDR that they have now. So people have been aware that this is a problem for the country that creates and issues the reserve currency. So I'd be surprised personally if another nation that exports a lot took on that role, unless they had every intention of not being an exporting nation anymore, which I don't see being in the cards for China. China is in the middle of building the largest infrastructure project of all time called the Belt and Road Initiative, which is to connect China with all these different ports and train stations and trucking routes all throughout Africa, Asia, and Europe. So they have every intention of continuing to be a major exporter, so I don't think China wants the role of being the reserve currency issuer. But this is a big deal because regardless of what the globe moves away from, whether they move away to a new basket currency or a new digital asset, or even if it were hypothetically to another nation's sovereign currency, the point is that there's a big shift away from the dollar. Now, what will this mean for the U.S.? Well, there'll be pros and cons. The cons, we'll start with the negative things first, is that if the dollar becomes weaker than it is, where it is now, then stuff that we import will become much more expensive. And if you want to travel overseas, your the stuff you buy in other countries after you go through the currency exchange will be more expensive. So it will hurt the ability of Americans to buy products made in other countries. They'll become more expensive. The advantage would be that U.S. manufacturing could again become more competitive. U.S. products would be more affordable to people in other nations, which would be a big advantage to U.S. manufacturing that has had that challenge to work around for the last few decades. All right, so we will see, though, as this de-dollarization process moves along, my personal prediction is that this will become a very significant issue when Saudi Arabia joins BRICS and starts to sell oil in a currency other than the dollar. That will formally end the petrodollar agreement that I mentioned was started in the 70s, and this is probably the most significant impact on dollar strength and dollar dominance of any other particular trade agreement or trade, purchase. It is not yet clear what they will sell the oil in. They might sell it in a bunch of different things. It might not be like before where you could only sell it in one currency. But the significance will be that it would massively decrease demand for the dollar, which would weaken the dollar overall. Now, there's been chatter about this for a long time. Saudi Arabia did talk about this recently in sort of this summer and fall of 2022, but without a date. So this could drag on for a long time. We don't really know, or this could be something that happens fairly quickly. But I would not be surprised if it happens, and I would expect there to be changes in the price of things that you import from other countries if you are based in the US, because we might see a big impact on the exchange rate. All right, that is de-dollarization. If learning about these kinds of concepts is interesting and relevant to you, please join me on my locals community, twostepsahead.locals.com. I'll have the link in the description, and we post lots of things related to geopolitics, to blockchain technology, and the future of money. Alrighty, I will see you in the next video.